Hi there. My name's Jodie Levy, and I'm Head of Regional Tech Policy at DCMS. I'm coming to talk to you today about a report that we recently released in September this year, looking at the UK's regional digital ecosystems. The context of this report is that we wanted to really make sure that we're understanding the digital economy at a local level because it's a great driver of prosperity and economic opportunity across the UK. So I'll talk to you about some of the context of the policy in DCMS and some of the aims and objectives of the project and how we set about to create a bit of a framework to understand what a digital ecosystem needs and what are the things that we need to measure to track and understand its performance at a local level. And I'll explain some of the kind of quantitative and qualitative methods that we used in this analysis and some of the example dashboards we had for each region and nation. And I'll talk about the headline findings for the report and some of the policy recommendations that came out. So in terms of the kind of context of the policy area and why we set about this work is that we really care in DCMS about enriching lives and driving prosperity. And we see the digital sector and the economy as a huge opportunity to really do this across the UK. The digital sector has grown in real terms by 3 times the rate of the total UK economy since 2015, but we still see a proportion of the GVA for the digital economy very much weighted in London and the southeast. Yet we see some great potential hotspots and clusters around the UK, and we know we want to kind of make sure that we can support those further. So we set about to understand how we could measure and track the digital ecosystems at a local level. And we wanted to create an assessment framework so we can understand the metrics to understand what we needed to measure and track locally. And we looked to provide a comprehensive overview of the region's strengths, specialisms, institutions, and different digital specialisms at a local level so that we can understand how people are partaking in the digital economy. And we looked at creating this framework to look at the different kind of inter and intra relationships between different regions as well. So it wasn't just looking at a regional level, but we were looking at a sub-regional level as well. And we tested some of this data and dashboards with stakeholders across the UK so that we could bring in some qualitative insights as well. So we hosted 12 roundtables with each nation and region with a variety of stakeholders from the tech sector, local government, universities, accelerators, and different business groups as well. This is the framework that we came up with. So the literature identified 5 key components that make up the digital ecosystem. So the 5 circles across here are the different themes of the metrics that we measured. So we looked at kind of classic digital tech, business employment and GVA statistics. So digital sector unicorns, business survival rates, high growth firms, regional employment in the digital sector. And then we looked at place infrastructure and assets. So does that place have the office space for startups to go and work in, or do they have a number of accelerators, or how are the house prices compared to earnings and things like that. Then we looked at ideas and innovation. So are there many kind of university spin-outs? How much R&D investment has there been, to kind of give an indication as to the kind of maturity as well of the ecosystem as well. And we looked at the investment and business environment. So we often hear some of the issues around growth in the digital sector and is around access to VC investment, public sector financing, and the availability of angels outside of London and the southeast. And the last one we looked at was people skills and inclusion. And this is all about the STEM graduates, how high are the digital sector wages, looking at digital inclusion as well. So how many households have access to internet, and the supply and demand of digital tech skills in the location. So after we came up with this framework, we then looked at a methodology, and we wanted to really understand how we could assess regions across these metrics. So we were looking at creating this methodology that looked at looking at the indicators separately and making sure that there was kind of a way that we could create a median for that indicator. And so here you'll see that the blue dot represents the area that we will be looking at, and we could see whether they're in the top percentile or the bottom percentile for that particular metric. And it would allow for us to understand the outliers across different indicators as well. This is an example of some of the maps that we produced in the report. So here you can see the kind of digital sector employment and assets that for the West Midlands. So you can see here that there's different digital sector spin-outs and accelerators and scale-ups and unicorns. And it really shows here kind of the level of different employment clusters for the digital sector as well. And we found that, there's been a huge amount of GVA growth in the West Midlands, some real success in a gaming cluster in Leamington Spa, and there's a huge amount of fibre connectivity as well, and 5G technology through testbed activities that DCMS has supported the region to have. And the West Midlands Combined Authority have done some brilliant work in terms of looking at boot camps and specific funding streams for adult skills provision. But access to finance is still a huge barrier to growth, and is something that is perhaps preventing some businesses from scaling. But there's real, opportunities in areas such as fintech and the digitalization of manufacturing. So we see some great spotlights happening across the West Midlands. This is the kind of data set that we had for the West Midlands. So here you can see that methodology side kind of brought to life. And we really hope that some of this data will be really useful for local decision makers, people who make local digital strategies, to really look at some of these indicators and see where they kind of fit on the spectrum across different locations in the UK. And you'll see that the West Midlands have had quite a strong performance in terms of kind of where they sit relatively. And there are kind of different indicators here that show that they've had a really strong GVA growth over the last 5 years. They're in the top kind of percentile there. And they're also doing very well in terms of gigabit capable premises and things like that. Here's London's digital ecosystem. So the map is like very, very full and a lot more busy, and shows kind of the disparity of measuring every region to London. And you see there's a huge amount of kind of academic spin outs, accelerators, unicorns, things like that. And the startup environment seems very, very strong. And I think it's a different type of maturity, London. So, you see a lot more businesses and people talking about scaling to a larger size. And those are the challenges that they're looking at. And they're looking at international challenges as well, much more rather than local challenges. And they're ranked as, London's ranked as a top tech city globally. And there's a strong kind of cluster agglomeration effect in the capital. But we do see that kind of connectivity is still quite an issue, and the availability of talent is very strong, but there's a huge amount of skills and inclusion that needs to happen in some of the parts of London as well. And here you'll see as well the data. So here's the data set for London. And you can see that on average, prices of houses to wages are definitely nowhere near reasonable for kind of employees and things like that. So we see kind of different strengths as a result. So I'll just move on quickly. Some of the headline findings. So we found that the research confirms that every nation and region of the UK is seeing vibrant growth in their digital ecosystem, particularly in larger cities, which benefit from agglomeration economies and cluster effects. And we had a prediction in the report for every region and nation showing kind of what the potential opportunity for GVA and jobs would be to till 2025. And the overall picture for the UK is really, really positive. So it's predicted that the digital sector's GVA could reach 41.5 billion by 2025, creating a further 678,000 jobs. And there seems to be great prospects for fintech, cyber, health tech, AI, and the digitalization of non-traditional industries. And there's new opportunities for the digital sector since COVID, because the shift to remote working has allowed people to kind of live in many different locations across the UK. We spoke to many businesses who found that they could employ people from all over the world and across the UK as a result of remote working. And this was having a really good impact most of the time. But we did also find that this was also leading to some employers having to compete with salaries across the world, and making, I suppose, employers having to pay more as a result for that increased demand. And access to talent is consistently highlighted as an issue for growth for different employers across the digital economy. And that's definitely something that DCMS has been working on with the new tech talent visa with Tech Nation, and increasing kind of our footprint through the local digital skills partnerships, which we now have 8 regions. We now have 8 regions, and they will be supporting the digital skills gap across the UK. And for companies outside London, I suppose the difficulty was also around getting experienced talent. So maybe it was more about having a CTO or a managing director. That was the type of talent that was perhaps more particularly acute for getting. And yeah, so it's definitely something that we're looking at. And the availability of growth capital, like I said earlier, so getting that VC investment is definitely something that we see as an issue outside of London. And the British Business Bank is doing tremendous work in terms of growing that regional investment through their angels programs and their regional funds. So in terms of the policies and the kind of forward look, the report found that we need to ensure that every region and nation has a good digital incubator to act as this physical hub to create that agglomeration effect and to create a kind of networking opportunity for the digital ecosystem. And that improving access to finance is really imperative to driving some of this growth outside of London and the Southeast. And we need to ensure that there's a adequately joined up approach for public sector in terms of making sure that we all kind of know what we should be doing and supporting the sector locally. And I think that this report is a great step into doing that. And we should be supporting tech events and conferences held across the country, and many DCMS ministers actually do this already. So it's brilliant work that we do is to connect with many different festivals and facilitate their participation with the tech sector and things like that. And another thing that we looked at in the report was that the kind of definition for the digital sector at the moment perhaps doesn't capture all the kind of new verticals of tech. And we use a definition that is kind of recognized internationally, but it's definitely something that I know people have been looking at a bit more, is how do we capture more of the different clusters of tech into that. We also need to create a sustained long-term approach to addressing the skills and talent issues. And I know that there's a huge amount of work going on across government to look at kind of digital skills and science participation in the UK. And looking at adult education as well. So initiatives like CoClan in Scotland and our DCMS's local digital skills partnerships are great kind of examples of how we're supporting some of this education across the UK. And addressing the problems of digital poverty, so making sure people from disadvantaged backgrounds are not excluded from getting a job in the tech sector or not having the right devices to access the internet at home. and ensuring the universities are appropriately encouraged to grow their local skill base. So making sure that we can increase spin outs and industry collaborations, and ensuring that students are exposed to entrepreneurial education as well. So that's the end of my talk, but I'm very happy to kind of connect with any of you in the future. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your event today, and thank you very much for having me.